Hello and welcome back to Highfell, yet another little project of what can we get in this loco. So this is the freight branch line loco, roughly based on a B4, that's what we'll call it, and you can just pop a 6-pin decoder in there. If you're using the Hornby HM 7000 6-pin, we've already covered that you will need to use a stay alive at the time of filming because it's a little bit sketchy on reliability. But that's way too easy. What else can we do? So let's have a look and see if we can use the fantastic HM 7000 Next18 decoder, because that means we can open up the opportunity of having sound. We know we can use the Train O Matic stay alive with the Next18 decoder because the charging is fine on it. The Hornby decoder comes with a sugar cube speaker and it's plug on the end, so other than a little bit of wire shortening that I'm envisaging, that shouldn't be too difficult. I'm going to try and see if I can use one of these adapter boards again, because we'll be putting the wiring of the motor and the pickups to this board here, and that just makes it a really nice easy install, particularly for people who are not so confident with their soldering. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look about getting inside the loco and seeing what space we've got to play with. This little loco is dead easy to get in. It's quite a minimalistic model in terms it doesn't have a lot of extra detail, which makes it a great first time loco. It also makes it really quite nice for handling as well. So in order to take the loco apart, read the instructions and it will tell you remove this screw and this screw and then it unclips. So let's see how that goes. In case you're wondering, the size of screwdriver you want is a 000 crosshead. That is a lot finer than most people will have, so make sure you do have some jewelry or model making screwdrivers. These ones I got on Amazon, really nice quality, not particularly expensive, but if you try using the wrong screwdriver heads, you'll find that you will chew up the screws. Right, so make sure you don't lose anything. Always have a container that you can put your bits and pieces in. So I'll just use a food takeaway one. And just whilst we're in, we're going to have a look, because there's slightly different couplings on these. I really quite like the way that Hornby have developed a spring coupling for this loco. Much limited space, but by putting these little plastic tails on and folding up either side, you have got some centering action on there. That's really quite nice. Disappointingly for me, that has made my magic wand, which is the magnetic uncoupling device, the material they've made the hook out of on these ones is not magnetic. But dead easy, because this is an NEM socket, so we could swap that to any other one that would work with it absolutely fine. And incidentally, I just released a video on fitting the digital coupling system from SD model. You could install that on here as well, because it's just a question of pulling this out of the NEM socket and then you can install whatever coupling in there that you want. So we're going to just remove those. And then the next thing to do is to separate the chassis with the motor and everything from the body. And really what you'll find is there's a couple of clips on here. I'll try and see if I can get the light in. But I think perhaps the easiest thing to do is if just where you can see the flywheel of the motor, just there with some of these cranked tweezers, pop it in, just give it a lift, and out it comes. And there we are. So dead simple. Anybody that's actually had the body off one of these will know already that the connecting rods, where they go into the cylinders here, it's again quite basic, and they just sort of slide in that groove there. And when you put in the body back on, you just need to be careful, because it just gets as your fingers and thumbs going around everywhere, it's dead easy just to knock that back out, and you think, oh, knocked it out again. Right, so the existing setup is that you've got the blanking plate in there. And number 1 pin, as always, marked with a little paint blob on there. So you can always work these out, and then we can just see what we've got in the way of the motor setup. So we've got the worm gear with a flywheel. It looks like it's actually part of it, or whether I think that must be pushed on afterwards. Got to be an extremely expensive way of making it. Then we've got our little coreless motor sitting in there. We have 2 pickups for each side, so that's as many as you can get. Managed to count the number of wheels properly this time. And then we also have the wires for the motor, which come out of this end of the motor, out of the rear end. So we're not going to really worry too much about that, because that's fairly straightforward for now. The first thing we need to have a look at is how are we going to find some space? Well, looking at it, just taking a visual here, unlike the Terrier, you've actually got width in this. So if we can somehow get in here, we should be able to find some space. We've got some space in the back of the cab. Have a little looky. Probably not going to be able to use one of the Hornby enclosures, but you can make your own just out of a piece. Annoyingly, that little tab is just in the way. You can make your own with just a piece of flat plastic. So we could get that in there. Might be able to even get it on flat to the back. We'll have a look when we've got that off. I've got a feeling we'll be taking the cab off. And then hopefully we can find some space to put our caps and other bits and pieces. So how are we going to get inside? So I think looking at this, it's going to be a question of, there we go. Spotted it. There are a couple of little tabs there. Yep, so it's going to be a question of removing the cab first, I think. So that's where we're going to go. So identified, I've got these 2 little pips. You can see them here and here. And then you've got the clips underneath. And depending on the amount of glue that there is, because I think they use the, obviously they use the pips and stuff like that to locate, and then a little dab of glue to retain. And I think the best way I've found it is something like a pick. You can give, first of all, you can give it a bit of a wobble around, and that should help just kind of break the glue off. You can see I've actually already done it. But then with a toothpick, if you press on the back here and then to the other side, and you can just get the cab roof to loosen away like that. You see it's come away nicely. It hasn't broken anything, which is good. And then the next thing to do is just to release it from the chassis. I should get this into a better angle and I'll show you. Here we go, that's better. So if you push towards the back on the clip, away it pops. And if I show you a close-up of the way the clip is, you can see how it attached. So if you push this back that way, that should release the little tang on there. So now we've got the cab roof off. The next thing we want to do is remove the rest of the body. And these, again, are on these little tabs. 1, 2, and then just above where the cylinders are in there. I'll just tidy the end of that. Oh. It's gone in there. That one's in there, I think. You've got it started. I might be able to just get a blade in. If you ever use a blade like this and you've never done it before, be very careful because they do have a habit of snapping. That seems to be moving across in there. You can use the point of pliers. What you'll find is these are great things like cocktail sticks because they don't damage anything, but they can just break up when you're trying to use them. I'm going to go with a edge of the plier. I keep calling them pliers, tweezers. I'm going to try and see if we can just get that to sneak across into there. And then same at the front. Now, looking like it has got some glue. So we've got some cast here, and then we've got some plastic. Well, we've got the plastic body itself on there. Now, there's nothing electrical on here, so I'm going to try another little trick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak this in quite hot water and see if that helps soften the glue. So I'm going to do that. So just pop that into the washing up bowl with some just regular hot tap water and left it for a few minutes, long enough to make the important cup of tea. And then I managed to get the one end slightly, but if you listen, it's just starting to give. And I'm just going to use the edge of a fine screwdriver just to give a little bit of a tease away. Yeah, I think I've got that one. Got a little bit more. Still no idea what we're going to find when we get in here. Hopefully. There we go. Nice reassuring little crack, and that's it off. Oh, this is looking good. So we've got the plastic body. That will soon dry out. Obviously, don't do this without removing the chassis. And then you can see how the glue has been applied to the top of this weighted section here. And in this case, quite a bit. In fact, you can see there's quite a bit at the front. Usually it varies from model to model because these are all handmade, and I'm sure when they're putting it together in the factory, they're probably not thinking of somebody just starting to dig it apart under all the work they've done to start putting things in, and they're just saying, oh, it was never designed to have that. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to offer this up to the chassis and see if that gives us an idea how much space we've got to play with. You can see what I was meaning about them being a little bit fiddly. Right. So I'll have this in the right way around. Let's make them see how tight it is. Ah, my thumb's getting in the way. Try that. Right. Goodness. There we go. Well, that tells me two things. I think we have an opportunity here. Okay, I said it tells me two things. First of all, we have an opportunity, I think, in the space. I had to stop, had a bit of a sniffly nose. And then the other thing it tells me is that I'm not sure if that'll pick it up. Goodness me. That pickup, that's extraordinarily close to this metal. Again, I think this is an area that would benefit from some insulation. So, what do we think we can do? Well, I think, let's dry it off. we could remove some metal, and that would allow, we would be able to get the Next 18 in there comfortably. Now let me just pop that little adapter on there and see, would that, do we have enough height? Ooh, that's close. Wish we could get that way up. Let's just check. Yeah, I think we can do something here. And then the next component we need to think about getting in is the controller for the stay alive. Now, by using the Train O Matic one, I've mentioned this before, the back side of the Train O Matic one is clear of any components, and it's really super small, and you might not have noticed this. It's exactly the same size, or rather slightly smaller even than the antenna area on a HM 7000 Next18 decoder. It'd also be the same for the 8-pin if you have one of those. If you have the 8-pin, you don't need to worry about this board. You can just, again, wire straight to it. The reason why I'm using the Next18 is because I've got a nice little stash of them from when they were offered at ridiculously good value. The 8-pin with the little wiring harnesses always seem to be a bit more money. I suppose that's because they're not really going into things like the TT120 locos. So we have an opportunity to have this on here, and it doesn't make the height of the board anymore, which is very useful. And we're going to be taking away the, oops, hold it up to the camera. We're going to be taking away this little PCB as well. I think we have some opportunities to do something. Now, by taking away the material here, we are going to lose some weight. But do remember, we are actually adding some weight back in with other components. So I don't think it's going to be too drastic, and we might be able to even sneak some other weight back in somewhere else. I've removed the PCB, so we have the two track wires, they're the longer ones, and we have the two motor wires there. I've had a play around. We are going to remove some material from these sides here, and I shall get to that in a moment. But what I'm just going to mention is, although I'm going to go with the Next18 decoder, there isn't the space to use a little adapter, which is a shame because it would have been nice and easy just to solder to there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder to the pads that are actually already on the decoder here. The Next18 decoder and the 8-pin are essentially the same decoder, but with different interfaces. If the idea of soldering to those little pads as you look at this gives you the heebie-jeebies, but you still want to do this, then I would say buy yourself an 8-pin, shorten the wires down and solder to those. That'd make your life a lot easier. Because I've got these, I'm going to go with it, and I'm not too concerned. So the ones that you're looking at, if you are going to go onto the Next18, and it's a decent sized pad, you should be able to find that. You have two motor turn pads either side, so in this case motor plus, motor negative, and then not the next pad but the third one in, you'll notice it is actually attached to the Next18 interface. So you've got a track right and a track left. So there's one in the middle there between those two that we're going to be using. Just ignore that. The other thing I'm going to do, and it might seem a bit sort of weird, is I'm going to wire these absolutely the way around. So providing you put two motor connections to the two motor pads and two track ones to the two track inputs, it doesn't actually matter. You can set direction dead easy with DCC. Just going to CV19, and you can make one setting, and so that it means that whichever arrow is pointing in one direction on your controller, it'll always be forward, so you can always make it match even if it doesn't. I won't know till we get there, because I think these are actually wired the way around. These coreless motors do tend to run their setup differently, so you wire them back to front anyway. So that's what the plan is there. What we're going to do is run, they say the decoder is going to slightly offset so that we've got room to get the plug in. The other thing I'm going to do is remove some material from these weights. So on one side, we're going to remove about 4mm down here till it gets to this position. So we only need to take it off for the length of the decoder. And I say 4mm means that this will then sit in this area here, and it won't interfere with the motor, and then it will also, the body will go on okay. When it sits to one side, you'll notice the plug, we do need to make a little bit of space for the two plugs. Now again, if you wanted to, you could leave that material in place and you could solder directly onto the solder pads on the decoder. I haven't decided whether I'm going to do that yet, but I think I might do it with the plugs so that you can see a way of doing it, and then it makes it easier for people to follow. So one side is going to have the full length removed. On the other side, we don't need to be as savage really, and I'm going to just make a little slot, so that'll be 4mm deep, but it won't go the full length, so you'll have more material left in place. We're not going to take all of this off, and by the time we've got other bits and pieces in, we're not going to be a million miles on weight. Speaker. Now, we can't use a Hornby sound chamber because they're too big to go in here. It wasn't designed for going in here, but the speaker itself would fit nicely in here. You might have a little bit just creeping up into a bit of the back window there, but if I remove this little seat area here and make sure that's flat, I can use the back of the cab, I can use that as the baffle, or rather the ceiling part. So we'll get to that and we'll pop that in. The control board, that will attach to the flat section, which is the end of the decoder, which is where the antenna is buried inside there. And then the stay alives themselves, the caps, they're going to sit like this. I've got various different combinations of them there, so we're going to join those up together like that. I'll use these two, and they'll sit here just ahead of the firebox. So when this is in here like that, the caps will sit here. The what, again, probably pop some heat shrink over just to cover it up, a little blob of black paint so you don't see the silver top of the caps. Run the wires through there, probably just open those up a little bit so we can get those in, and so that'll sit up neatly there, and then you don't really need to move any other cab detail, and you should just have room, as I for the speaker to sit behind as well. So that should all sit in there nice and neatly. It is a bit tight, but it's going to go in. So that's the plan. The next thing to do is to start doing some soldering, and that will be a question of soldering onto the Next18 decoder, and then I can test that with the loco and make sure everything's working. So I've marked up using my caliper, using the pointer ends on there. So we've done a line along here at 4mm, and I've marked with red the bit we're going to take out, and that should give enough space for the decoder to slot in there. It's going to be up at this end, so we'll have room for the plugs to go in there. So this is the only bit we're removing on this side, and on the other side we're removing up to this section here. So again, it's the bit that I put the red marks in, and I'll just use a Dremel just to take that out. and then the decoder should sit nicely in there and will give us room for the plugs and should straddle the motor. So I've been dremeling away, and as you can see, some material has been removed. It's not huge amounts actually. I appreciate some of this will have gone up as dust, but that's pretty much what it was. And that doesn't, well, on my scales, that won't even register a gram. So even if I was very generous and said 2 grams, by the time you've added the weight of the other components we're going to put in, I think we're going to be something back to what the original weight was rather. Well, we'll see. I'm going to show you how I've done this. So hopefully now it becomes a little bit clearer. So that's the notch out for the plug, both the Stay Alive and the speaker. I've elected to not try and hardwire that because I think if you're going to use the 8-pin, you're more than likely thinking, I don't need to solder anymore, and use those plugs, and that's fair enough. The plugs are there. We can shorten the wires down a little bit so we haven't got too much excess. It's pretty easy, especially on things like the speaker, which comes with quite a long wire actually. The couple of things to mention, obviously when you're using something like a Dremel, do take a huge amount of care because they're really a mini angle grinder, and they'll take a finger off if you're not paying attention. The amount of heat generated from cutting through here is surprising. So take your time. To give you an idea, I did this in about 4 or 5 goes and cooled this down just so once I'd finished doing a little bit of work and the heat started building up, I cooled it down in some cold water, dried it off, and then went again, and you'll find it'll cut much easier. You don't need to cut excessive amounts off, just enough. And if I show you like this, you'll see what I was meaning about it being offset as well. Now that fits in, you can see it sits to one side, and the center section just sits nicely over the top of the motor, and you've got just good clearance. I've also made a little bit of a chamfer along here because you'll notice on this side there are a couple of taller components which do sit here, and the reason why I did that was it meant you don't have to go quite so low. So I've taken 4mm off, and if you do a little bit of a chamfer with a hand file, something like this, along here, that just again relieves a little bit of space, so that sits down that little bit further, so it's all going to seat in no problem. But it means you don't have to take a whole load off there. It's quite easy to do, and when you're doing it hand filing, it's very easy to control it. Okay, so that's that. I'll try and see if we can get these bits together and show you what clearance looks like. Pop that in there. Squeeze this over the top. Certainly a whole lot easier taking the wires off to try and calculate where you need to be. Right, so this is the smoke box end. The decoder is going to sit, and it's going to sit more that way. Again, where we've got these exposed edges, not just because the paint's missing, but because there's a decoder sitting near where the metal part is, and because I'm not particularly happy about how close those contacts are, I'll pop some Captain tape in there as well, so we'll get it all nicely insulated. Now the wires here are going to stick out a little bit because they're not attached to anything, but if we just try and squeeze that over there just to contain them for now, and then you can have a test fitting and make sure that that goes on nice and smoothly. I wouldn't recommend gluing with super glue the body again, and the reason for that is if you do want to be in, now you've got a decoder in there and bits and pieces, you don't want to have to go through all the fuss of trying to separate it. I get my favourite thing, glue and glaze, all card glue. It just has enough grab that it'll stop things from coming away. You can tease out the little spigots on the plastic body. That'll actually help it grip as well, so you don't drop it when you pull stuff out. You will notice I have actually removed the handbrake lever. I'll pop that back in actually. The reason why was because the chassis was getting quite hot and it went all floppy. So that's another reason why to just watch. And it was also a bit easier with it out of the way, but I've kept that and that should go back in. So everything fits in nicely. So some soldering is to do next, and also put some insulation on. That's a pretty easy job to do. And I find, particularly with things like Captain Tape, it's easier to put it on and then trim it with a knife up against the edges and things like that. You just want to make sure you don't have a whole load coming down the outside here, because it is a little bit of a tighter fit. Although you probably would get a layer of Captain Tape in there, and it might even sort of make it a little bit more snug. The speaker, as I say, going to trim the wires down on there, because it only needs the wire. If we imagine that's going to be on there, that can come down to one side and up along there. We want to make a bit of space, and I think what I'm also going to do is, if I can highlight it with my toothpick as a pointer, there is a ledge here, and I think if we take that off and make a little bit of a hole in the firebox, then that will accommodate the speaker on the back of the cab, and we've got our two upright capacitors just going to sit in there, and they can go central. If you wanted to, I'm sure you could probably put some figures or something like that in there and hide those. I'm not really too bothered about that at the moment. So I'll do something else and we'll tag that on next. And there we are. I've used just a section of Captain Tape, I think it's about 10mm, and just trimmed it so that it just covers over those two terminals on there. And then I've used some thinner and just work that into here and just run a strip, get my words out. And so there's absolutely no chance of any components touching a metal section on there at all. You can buy this stuff, and I think I picked that up on, I can't think it was eBay or Amazon, a few pounds, maybe £10, and there's just miles of it. It lasts you for a very long time, but it really is well worth having. It is better than insulation tape in a lot of ways, because the thinness of it means you can get it in. And I'm just going to show you the techniques. If you don't know this, if you do, look away. Once you put it on, just work it with something like a cocktail stick or the back of a set of tweezers, and then you'll find it will stick for England. Really good. There we go. So that's that bit done. Something else. Well, we're at that moment where we're going to solder up wires to my decoder, and what I've done is I've just popped some flux compound on the end of a cocktail stick, and I've just dabbed that onto the pads. I just really would like the solder to flow really well without we getting too much heat in there, and this is a way of giving it the best possible chance. So I'm going to do this off camera so I can see what I'm doing. I'm sure you'll appreciate. I don't want to solder up an entire side of a decoder whilst yapping away on the camera. Let's take a look what's gone on here. So I've shortened the speaker cable, and if you check on some of the videos I've done previously, I'll show you how you do that. Literally, although you can't see the solder joint, you just scrape that away with a knife, and that'll expose the solder. Do clean away any of the insulation on there, because it's quite plasticky, and if that gets on your eye, and that'll it'll stop the tip from working very well, and you need to keep your tip clean. Then all I've done is removed that little seat, made sure that's perfectly flat, and stuck the speaker directly to the back of the cab. You can see that's a nice slim line. We've got just enough wire for that to go in, and that'll go around into the plug. Similarly, on the Train O Matic Stay Alive controller, I've shortened the wires that lead to the capacitors. So when you get these, the capacitors aren't soldered on. But something to bear in mind, if you are getting these and you're not so good on your soldering and you want them soldered in a position with a certain length of wire, if you order these through Tram Fabriek, mention it to Sven and he will shorten that for you. Similarly on this one as well, I think that's something that Sven adds on, the appropriate, I can't remember what the name of this particular connector is, but the one that goes into the HM 7000 decoders. So I think you can adjust the length of that as well for you. So let him know if that's something you want doing. On this one, I decided that because it's quite a small area, I'd pop the heat shrink on and then I just warmed it up and just to condense that. So that's going to go in. If you wanted to, you could put some figures around. Now I've used a bit of black tack on the bottom. That's going to serve as a holder, and also it's going to act as some insulation as well. And then what we're going to do is just pop a little square of insulation tape onto the metal of the loco, onto the metal foot plate, and then that will also bolster the insulation there, so there's no chance of any short circuits. So get it level, that'll be nice. In we go. Make sure it's not going to be in the way of the holes. So the next thing to do is we'll go for this direction. I'm going to use a tiny bit of black tack again. That will just hold that in place over the top of the decoder. Make sure that's got plenty of space for all the wires to go down and everything to be level. It is just a question of squeaking those wires into there. And then bring this round and attach those in. So I'll do that off camera because I'm sure that everybody knows how you do that, and I'll just see what I'm doing. I had a microphone battery go down on me, so I've plugged in the Stay Alive and the speaker. You can see I've also put a little bit of tape across all of the wires, and the decoder's all in one there. I've also put some insulation tape on the speaker just to hide that so it doesn't look bright shiny silver. Just going to make sure we've got sufficient wire. Just going to tease a little bit through there because it's got to go either side of the two capacitors, and also you've got to have just enough in there that so when you start to put the body on, I've cut out a small slot in the bottom of the firebox door so that all the wires will be accommodated and it's not trapping anything. Should go on quite smoothly. If you've got any kind of resistance anywhere, just double check that you haven't caught a wire somewhere because it's sliding down the outside of those weighted sections. The front seems to clip in quite easily. If you've got any problems there, just make sure that the wires that come from the pickups and the motor aren't trapping. Then what we'll do is we'll colour up that red wire so that disappears. A little bit of black paint should do that. I'm going to put a little bit of glue on it, but not a huge amount. We'll get to that in a minute. The next thing to do is put the couplings back on. They also help hold everything together, particularly the chassis into the running board. So one of the things with the couplings is that Hornby have used, or their suppliers have used, a non-metallic metal. I've actually swapped these out for the Tillig ones. Now, even though the Tillig ones are identical, supposedly, they're not quite identical, but very, very similar. I do find they are more reliable. They just seem to operate better. Sometimes the Hornby ones can be a little bit hit and miss. I've had some wagons where they're just not quite as good. So anyway, pop those on. So load up a screw and just attach that in there. Screw that in. Doesn't need to be desperately tight, just firm. And again, with the rear one. So that's the loco all buttoned down. You can see there was just a little magnetic little charge on the end of the knife blade there, and it was just enough to lift that there. That means if you're using that little magnetic wand that I made for uncoupling, that's dead useful. Loco's all seated down. I say I'm not going to use any glue on the main body of this because I think I might actually repaint this. And what I'm going to use as one of my little favourite go-tos for gluing plastic that I don't want to be permanently glued forever, this is card glue. And I'm just going to get a little bit on the end of a cocktail stick, and then the little pips that poke through that front board of the cab, clip that into place and just hold it for a short time. It grabs pretty quick actually, even on plastic. I mean, it's brilliant for card, but it works really well with plastic. So if you've got any little jobs, or if you've got things like loose couplings that keep falling out of sockets, this is a good way of attaching it. So you just make sure that everything is down and you can't see anything amiss with it. That should be firmly sat onto the chassis. All seems to have gone together quite nicely now. The next thing is to give it a try. So here we are on the layout and the B4 is ready to go. But before we just get going, something I want to just show you is, this is the amount, get it into the camera shot. That's the amount of dirt that I took off the wheels just before I started testing it. So most of that has come off the rear of the wheel, the bit where the little phosphor bronze contact sits. So it is essential for reliable running to give your wheels a good clean, both when locos are new and probably just shortly after running in as things have started to settle down. Also when you've been handling, so obviously I've been handling the loco a lot as I've been doing this install, and my greasy fingers have been all over everything, and you're not going to get very good electrical contact with a load of dirt on the wheel, so well worth doing. So the next thing to do is to get some sound going. I'm running on full Bluetooth control here, so I'm going to hold the microphone a bit closer because if I hold it near me you won't hear the noise of the loco. There we go. And sometimes people wonder whether things are a setup. There we go. It is actually running on Bluetooth. And away we go. See if we've got it in the right direction. Do remember that when you're using the stay alives, particularly the Train O Matic one, and also to some extent the AE one, make sure that you do give the capacitor a chance to actually fully charge. The larger Hornby ones do seem to have a faster charging. Just disappeared off to out of sight for the moment, and then we'll run it over the viaduct, which means taking in the reverse loop. That doesn't seem to have presented any problem. So there we have it, the Hornby TT120 branch line freight set, the B4 fitted, fully sound fitted with a stay alive, all enclosed in the loco. Yes, there is some cutting on this one, but not desperately difficult to do. I have actually also done a motor calibration. I think it's always worthwhile. I've used the Lion profile, which is normally set up for 00. So in those cases, doing a motor calibration is a good idea. I have also set the CV1442 to a value of 1. Hasn't really made tremendous difference because it was already running well anyway. But there we go. That's how you can do it. You can get it all inside this loco. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching that, and that some of you will feel brave enough to give it a go. To say it's not desperately difficult, and I'm sure you'll enjoy having sound and all that extra control. Of course, it also does open up the opportunity to fit lights, digital couplings, all sorts of things if you want to this loco as well, because we'll be using the Next18, or you could use the 8-pin decoder. So thank you very much for watching. Do take care and happy modelling.